Thank you, Emily, and thank you to all of you who have come here tonight to be with us for what we think is going to be a very exciting talk on poverty and income inequality. My name is Peter Giles. I'm a Jesuit priest and a physician by training who began this program. And I first want to introduce myself in Spanish to those who are with us. Me llamo Peter, soy un médico y padre jesuita, y soy fundador de este programa de Una Fe que Hace Justicia. I want to just tell you for a moment, first, before I do that, I want to welcome our streaming audience. It's very important to us that we do develop a streaming audience of people outside of Boston so that we can really bring this program to other people in different parts of the country or beyond. I want to spend just a moment, for those who don't know, how this program came about. About 30 years ago now, was in medical training at the National Institutes of Health. And I really felt a call to try and experience really the downside of life that so many people in this world experience. Poverty, being left behind with no opportunities at all. And I went at that time from the National Institutes of Health as a physician to provide health care in El Salvador at the end of the 1980s and early 1990s when that country was in the midst of a civil war. I did provide health care in the conflictive zones of that country, the mountainous region in the northern part of the country, and also provided health care in the city of San Salvador, which at that time was the most densely populated city in the Western Hemisphere. The program came about really through my experience among the people there and what I saw of the Jesuits in that country. I was not a Jesuit at the time. I was a person, just a physician providing health care. The witness of the people, that country at that time was controlled by an oligarchy, less than 1% of the country, controlling about 90 or 95% of the wealth of the country. Most people, the population of that country at that time was about 5 million. Most of those people were destitute, living in tin huts, mud shacks. And it was a very impressionable experience for me to experience. And on top of that then, I actually studied theology at the Jesuit university in the country called the UCA, Universidad Centroamericana. And at that time when I arrived, I came to Salvador about 3 weeks after the Jesuits had been murdered by the oligarchy. I don't know if people remember, in 1989, November of 1999, there were 6 Jesuits murdered by the government. That is a country where Oscar Romero was murdered by the government. All of these people really standing up to human rights, for the rights of the people, the destitute of that country, to have human dignity and to live with a fair share of the goods of God's creation, something that certainly was not happening. It had a tremendous influence on me, and this program is an attempt to really turn that over here in a first world society, which in fairness is probably not capable of being done. But the attempt here is through 3 programs to give people like us an experience of some of what happened to me. And we do that first through what we call workshops. These are small gatherings, 60 to 70 people in different churches around the city. Most of them have been at St. Cecilia's in Boston. And those meetings are really, we invite a speaker who talks about a faith-based topic. Recently we had one about the prophets, the Jewish prophets. And the question is, what do they mean to us today? The idea of these meetings is to really move people of faith, any faith, Jew, Christian, Muslim, somebody of another denomination, to move from the principles of their faith, what they say they believe, into action on behalf of people in need. The second component is these meetings tonight. These meetings are not faith-based. These meetings are talking about issues of social justice. And we do that so that we can try to invite the entire city of Boston. These meetings are open to all faith denominations, people of goodwill. And as we'll hear tonight, we talk about an issue that really affects vulnerable people. The purpose is to raise consciousness on our part as to what's going on, not necessarily only in other parts of the world, but right here in our city and in other cities around the country. The third component that we deal with, I was advised going back 2 years ago that we needed to develop an action component to this, where we could try to involve people. And what we settled on is a program for English for speakers of other languages. It goes by the acronym ESOL. It's based at St. Anthony's Shrine, a couple of blocks from here. And its purpose is twofold. We invite people who need English-speaking skills. We have a lot of recently arrived people in our city who do not speak English or do not speak it well enough to be able to really command a salary in the workplace that would really support a family. So we invite them in with the idea that through our collaboration with Jewish Vocational Services, we try to raise their English level speaking skills to a point where we can channel them into a program at JVS that will help them find jobs at a higher pay scale than they would ordinarily have as entry-level people with very poor English skills. That's one part of the program. The other part of that program is really to invite people like many of us here tonight who do speak English. Probably most of us have a decent education. And what we try to do is invite people to come and be a volunteer in that program. Our teachers are professional teachers, but what we have in each classroom are 2 or 3 volunteers. And those volunteers are able to help the teacher in one-on-one or one-on-2 or 3 people, helping them with drills that will help them gain better English skills in the street, going to the store, daily living skills, and beyond. So we invite all people here tonight at the end of the meeting to come to our table. We have a resource table at the back of the room to find out more about volunteering. And having said that, too, I also want to mention our other Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. They are also at a table in the back, and they're here to really sensitize people to the gun violence in this country, the number of people who are dying each month. I think I was told recently it's about 100 people a month or so who are dying in this country related to gun violence. So please do, at the end of the meeting, check out the tables.
That's a day.
100 a day, I'm sorry. Okay. So with that, too, I will be brief by saying, too, we ask you to be aware of our webpage, which will be flashed up on the board or has been on the walls. It's faith-justice.org. We welcome your presence on it and to learn more about what we're doing. So with that in mind, I want to introduce our panel tonight. Our talk is Poverty and Inequality in Boston, Economic Inequality. And is it a tale of 2 cities? Are we living in a city that is that polarized, where some are gaining at the expense of others, or are we just leaving some behind? And hopefully we will learn more about that. What the impacts are in society on the individual and social level for people who are not doing that well. And with that then, I would invite the streaming audience to realize that they can ask questions on the chat page. And if you ask questions during our question and answer session, we can project them here or announce them for you. If you would tell us what part of the country or what part of the world you're in, that would be very helpful to us. So with that in mind then, I would like to introduce our panel tonight briefly and then turn the discussion over to them. They will talk for 40 minutes, and at about 7:20, the way the program will work tonight is after they're finished talking, we will have a 5-minute experiential speaker. By that I mean someone who's experienced some of what they are talking about in their own personal life will share a little bit of their story with us tonight. Christine has benefited us, or will benefit us, by her sharing her own experience of poverty in Boston. And then after that happens, we will have about 7 or 8 minutes of table discussion. There are questions on your table, and we'll try to get people just to talk a little bit. There are people at tables who come from different social, economic, religious, ideological backgrounds, and we'd like to be able to share. The only thing we really ask is that nobody has to agree with anybody here, but we do ask that people respect each other and provide them with basic human dignity, that people can say what they want and they can be respected. So, having said all that, our host tonight really is Mary Jo Bain, is a Harvard Kennedy School of Government, Thornton Bradshaw Professor of Public Policy and Management. She was formerly the Assistant Secretary of Children and Families at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And Debbie, thank you for being here. We have John Barrows from the City of Boston, the Mayor's Office, who is the Chief of Economic Development. Thank you, John. And finally, Debbie Rambo, who probably many of you would know from Catholic Charities. She is the President and CEO of that organization for the Archdiocese of Boston. So with that, I would just ask our panelists if you would speak slowly, distinctly, because in that booth, your conversation is being translated into Spanish so that our Spanish-speaking audience here who are using headphones can really understand the conversation and be able to contribute with questions later on. So with that, I turn it over to you, Mary Jo. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Peter, and thank you all for being here. I want to frame the conversation tonight in terms of challenge and opportunity. We'll obviously be talking about the challenges, but I hope we can spend most of our time thinking about the opportunities that we and our city can take advantage of to build better lives for all our folks. I'm going to give a couple of facts, not too many, and Debbie and John will chime in on these, I know. Part of the opportunity comes from the fact that the Boston metropolitan area is one of the richest in the country. You know, we're not quite up there with San Francisco, but we are one of the richest areas in the country, median household income of over $82,000. So we have a base to build on. But the Boston area is also one of the most unequal in the country. The most recent data I saw said that Boston is number 7 in terms of income inequality, with the top 5% of the population in Boston making 15 times more on average than the bottom 20%. Now, a couple of years ago, Boston was number 1 in terms of inequality, so we've made a little progress. And a city can become less unequal either by rich people doing badly or by poor people doing better. And luckily, what happened in Boston over the last couple of years is the latter rather than the former. We also, as you know, have an extremely low unemployment rate. We have a dynamic economy. There should be opportunities for everybody. And I think the challenge for us all is to make that happen. Like many other metropolitan areas in the country, Boston has seen, to some extent, stagnating wages in the middle. We have seen job growth at the high end. We have seen job growth at the low end, not so much in the middle. And another big challenge for Boston is that we have been and we remain a segregated area, segregated in terms of income, segregated in terms of race and ethnicity. And I think that the challenge for us in these times is to build a city that is inclusive and good for both the rich and the poor. There's huge variation across neighborhoods in Boston and in the metropolitan area as a whole. And so I think that attention to the smaller places within our area is going to be very important. So another couple of facts. When you look at the overall poverty rate for the metropolitan area of Boston, it's about 10%. It's pretty low. But if you look at the poverty rate in Roxbury, the poverty rate in Roxbury is 35%. And the poverty rate for kids in Roxbury, for children in Roxbury, is 48%, according to the most recent data. Many of those kids suffer from homelessness. They suffer from housing instability. Some suffer from food insecurity. And one thing we've learned from recent research is that the opportunities that children have to do better than their parents, to fulfill their own development, depend an awful lot on the zip code that they live in. One of my Harvard colleagues has done some very important research and tells us that a child's zip code is more determinative of what will happen to that child than pretty much anything else, parents and so on. So the challenge for us, I think, is to figure out how we build neighborhoods, how we build a city, how we build a region that is inclusive, that provides opportunities for everybody, that means that is a city where it's not just the rich people who are benefiting from the dynamism of the economy, but everybody. And you know, it just seems to me that a city as rich as Boston ought to be able to provide the good jobs, it ought to be able to provide housing, it ought to be able to provide good education, and obviously there's been a lot done. But I think what we want to talk about tonight is kind of not only what's been going on, but what we can do in the future to make our city a better place. So John, as Peter said, works for the mayor as the economic development director. I also know that he was formerly the executive director of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, and I think that's actually really important because of the neighborhood focus of that initiative. He'll talk a little bit about what the city's been doing, and then Debbie will talk about some of what's been going on in the nonprofit area. And then I'll do a little, take the prerogative of the chair and ask some questions and get some discussion going. So, John.
Thank you, Mary Jo. It's really an honor to be here with you tonight. I think the reason why I work for the mayor is because sometimes when you challenge someone in a race, you don't get to work for them. And I ran against the mayor in 2013. And in that race, I talked a lot about inequities in our society, particularly economic inequalities. And the mayor and I really began to use some of the same talking points at some point, and that happens over time when you're running in a field like that. And he made me the chief of economic development, not because I brought big corporate experience, but in fact because I brought a neighborhood-based experience that was looking to create better opportunities for more residents. And for us at the city, the priority is to create more opportunities for all Bostonians. And trying to create an economy that does that is a really tough thing because we are really running upstream. The system isn't necessarily set up for that. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit, talk about some of the things we're doing, and perhaps some of the things you can do. I think it's important that I start by saying I really believe that the unit of change on these questions is the neighborhood, is the community. And I believe that Boston has an opportunity to make change because we are in fact a city of strong neighborhoods and strong communities. And when we first came into office in 2014, as you indicated, Boston was ranked #1 in terms of income inequality. Today we're ranked #7. And we're not proud of #7, but we are proud of the trend. And it is because lower income individuals in our city are making more money than they used to make. So in fact, system-wide policy change and changes matter, right? So I'm not saying that they don't matter, but I do believe that this question of zip codes and the inequity that exists from neighborhood to neighborhood ends up having a lot more impact on individuals than even some of the system-wide change. And I'll tell you why. Right now, Boston is enjoying a really low unemployment rate, under 3%, historic lows. However, in some of our neighborhoods, in Roxbury, in fact, it is closer to 5%. In Dorchester, it is over 5%. And in Mattapan, it's just under Dorchester. And so 2-3 times the average of our city's unemployment rate. When you look at other factors, you'll find the same levels of disparity. There is a geographic disparity to neighborhoods, and then there are racial disparities. In a city that is very segregated in terms of housing still, those end up coinciding, where there are large densities or populations of certain races or ethnic groups that live in our neighborhoods. But for instance, we all might be familiar with the Boston Federal Reserve Bank's report called The Color of Wealth. And in that report, it looked at wealth distribution among different racial communities and ethnic communities, a really good ethnic breakdown. And it realized that in doing some of the research that in a white household, the median net worth is about $247,000, where in an African American household, the median net worth is $8. And so that level of wealth disparity then follows the neighborhoods. So not only do you have income disparity, job participation disparity, but you also have wealth disparity. And then what does that mean in terms of opportunities? Well, I think the biggest thing it impacts, and one thing that I really care about, is education attainment. Not only do the children who live at a high rate of poverty in these neighborhoods not have food and housing security, they actually don't have the same level of educational opportunities that other children have. And that continues to keep many families in our city in a cycle of intergenerational poverty. There are families in our city that have been poor since their ancestors were freed from slave. And that's a shame. And they can trace it. And in fact, there was a project that did an interview of families living in our public housing communities here in Boston, and we're able to trace some families back. And if we can't break intergenerational poverty, then I'm not sure what these policies and our efforts are really doing. And so for me, that is a large concern, which is why right now we are focusing on a number of different things. One is workforce development and career training. We've attracted or organically created over 120,000 jobs to the city of Boston in the last 5 years. And we need to make sure that all Bostonians have access to that. And so the city has launched a number of workforce and career training programs, but we have some amazing organizations, some present here, doing work in our city that people should plug in with because it matters. Financial literacy, critical. We can't have, and in fact, one of your colleagues, and perhaps the same colleague you were referring to, talked about the importance of child development per zip code, and one of the biggest stressors in a child's development and how their brains are wired is financial stress. Yeah. And financial literacy becomes a huge solve for a lot of the issues we have in our households. But economic mobility is also important. And what you find in a tight labor market is that even when people are employed, most people are underemployed. And so in our city, we have a large population of people who are working, who have higher skills than the jobs that they are working in, and are not getting paid at the level that they should be getting paid. Huge problem. And then the other piece is government needs to continue to offer education, quality education at a lower and lower age. The mayor just announced universal pre-K, quality universal pre-K for all 4-year-olds in Boston, which is really important, but now we need to continue to trend lower. Because child development, early child development is a huge indicator for success. In fact, I believe it was the Indiana Federal Reserve Bank, showed that for every dollar that was spent on a child between the age of birth to 3, helped to save $17 in intermediary programming later in their teens. And so what a great investment for our families, what a great investment for our society. We've also made sure to have options for free tuition, community college and colleges in Boston, and that's something that is really important. I can talk more about that. And then lastly, I'll say this, neighborhood planning and neighborhood development. The city just launched a pilot program a couple of years ago where we are working with the residents of Upham's Corner. Because working with residents to help change their neighborhoods matter. I know there's some residents here today, and it is important that the city becomes a partner in strengthening our communities. And the city's not set up for that, let me just say that. But we are trying and we are working successfully with a group of residents that are organized, informed, and are ready to work with the city. And we are going to build that neighborhood in a way that it does not displace the residents or the businesses in that neighborhood. And that is something that we need to model in other neighborhoods and really take to scale. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Debbie.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here tonight, and it's good to see so many familiar faces in the audience. John and I are going to end up talking about some of the same things because the not-for-profits in Boston are really strong partners with government, as we are with educators. But let me just tell you a little bit about Catholic Charities. We've just changed some of our visioning, and our purpose in the world right now is really with the ambition to eliminate poverty. So that intergenerational poverty that John spoke to, that's such a difficult nut to crack. No one's been able to quite figure it out. Is something that we're taking on as part of our mission. We provide food and shelter assistance, child care, youth programming, adult education and job training, and immigration and legal assistance to individuals and multi-generational families across Eastern Massachusetts, and those are families of all faiths. And our goal is to really move people from crisis to sustainability. Crisis to stability to sustainability. Whew, easier said than done. One of the things that we know, and John referenced, is that poverty is part of what feeds toxic stress for children and for families. And so it's a very real issue for us, and just something that we keep in mind for everything that we do. We've also done some new messaging research, and one of the things that I was really surprised to find out, despite all the coverage of poverty and all the coverage of some of our differences and all of the coverage about racial inequities, is that most people in Massachusetts think everybody's doing well. And certainly there are a lot of people doing well, but as Mary Jo shared, 1 in 7 children in Massachusetts are living in poverty. And a single parent with 2 children working a 40-hour week at a minimum wage of $12 earns only $24,960 a year. The living wage for that same family is closer to $68,000. So there's a huge $30,000, $35,000 gap for people who are working hard, trying to do the right thing, and still be able to live comfortably, not even comfortably, cover the basics in the city of Boston. We've provided service across our region to about 165,000 folks over the course of the last year. A lot of them are 1,700 kids in early childhood education programs, job training programs, and adult education, all part of our effort to start early in education and create a workforce that's going to be ready for the jobs of the future. I know John referenced the numbers of jobs that are available in Boston and in the region, and there's a mismatch between the jobs available and the people ready to take them. That's a really significant gap right now, so we're working really hard to try and create job training programs that better meet the needs of the companies out there who are looking for help. We haven't really we've talked about poverty, but part of the challenge is the shrinking middle class. And those are people living under about $58,000 a year. And just the number, what's fascinating to me, or not fascinating, frustrating to me, is the number of jobs that people need to work in order to get there. And I think part of part of our closing that gap, that income gap, has been that people in the recession in 2008, we had families where people were working 2 jobs, husband was working 2 jobs, mom might be working 1 job. One of those jobs definitely went away, and a couple of the other jobs might have gone to part-time. So we saw people slipping out of middle class into poverty. And I think one of the reasons that that gap is changing is because now with full unemployment, in a full working economy, people are working more than 1 job, but they aren't great jobs. Yeah. So it's one of the challenges that we have as we consider how we work with families. I do think there's, I wanted to talk about 4 things really, and specific strategies that we employ. And I know there's a lot of other not-for-profit providers in the audience, so I know you're all doing some of this wonderful work. Really direct service to meet basic needs, whether it's food, financial stability, education, whether it's shelter. We have Catholic Charities runs 4 family shelters, 3 in the city of Boston. Education, that's also really very important. We start early. We start with infants and toddlers. We applaud the city's efforts to bring universal pre-K to the city, although it's coming at some cost to the not-for-profit providers of early childhood. And I do worry that some children whose parents are choosing the public schools don't have good after-school or surround care in the summer. So that's a problem that we just have to address and fix together, I think. Workforce development, and then advocacy, which is something that I think everybody in the room can participate in. I can go on, Mary Jo, but
But you're going to stop?
but I can stop.
Okay. Okay. Let me pick up on a couple of the things that have come up here and kind of see how people react to. Debbie, you said that one of the things we're seeing, and I see it in the statistics as well, is that the jobs are at the rich end and at the poor end, and the city seems to be becoming, not entirely, but seems to be becoming rich and poor, but not the place that the teachers and the firefighters and the people in the middle level jobs. And if the vision for the city is the whole range, what needs to happen both in terms of job but also in terms of housing? And let's just brainstorm a little bit about the housing issues and how we think about those. And I guess I should also admit that we can all spend 2 or 3 minutes raving against the federal government, but let's just stipulate that not much is going to happen there. What can we do at the state and city level on some of these issues? So, John.
Right, no, I think we will not get stuck on the federal government.
Yeah, no, we will not.
However, there's no federal funding for housing, and there's no housing plan coming from the federal government, and it's a big barrier.
I know.
Moving on. I think the city of Boston at this point has 19.6% of its housing stock is currently deed restricted affordable housing. And we have deed restricted.
Tell me what that means.
Deed restricted affordable housing means that there is some covenant agreement or real tool used to keep it restricted, at least for some period of time, and more in perpetuity.
Okay.
So that we're not chasing affordable housing.
Okay, got it.
So it used to be that not too long ago, affordable housing, when the city subsidized affordable housing, we would do it for 10, 20 years, as if that was a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
We now do it for we try to do it for at least 50 years, and more we're doing it in perpetuity. Yeah. A place that should have and so that only happens if you have a government that believes that affordable housing is not just a commodity that you sell and buy. Housing is not just a commodity that you sell and buy, but housing is also an infrastructure that helps to create the kind of place that you want to live in, do business in, work in. And in fact, we've heard from employers, we've heard from our residents that we have to have a mixed income community for this community to continue to work, right? Employers say it all the time. The middle of the community in terms of income, the professionals, the teachers, haven't been served well by historic affordable housing policies. That has changed. Recently, you're seeing a lot more affordable housing for the moderate income level and or working, what we call workforce housing, such as the Beverly, which is 100% affordable housing at the end of the Greenway in the North End by North Station, which is all about workforce housing. right? And there are more and more of those developments happening. And in fact, in our neighborhood work, in the work that we've done in Plant Dudley, and the work that we're doing now in Upham's Corner, the model is to not build just affordable housing, but it's to do 1/3 affordable, 1/3 moderate, and 1/3 market, in order to have the mixed income community that allows for the vibrancy for an immigrant family like my parents to come, me then to go to school, make more money than my parents, and still be able to live in that neighborhood, right? And then my children being able to go to school, come back, and still being able to live in my neighborhood. And so I just want to agree with you 100%, that we have to have the stock of housing that houses all levels of income in our city, and we're moving in that direction.
Yeah. Debbie, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. So the workforce housing is very interesting. It's really, and I just double-checked the formal and official definition. It has to do with housing that's affordable, that's linked to the median income, that's within walking distance or reasonable transportation of your work. So it's really connected to workplace and workforce. My worry about it is the median income in Boston is so high.
Yeah.
It's $85,000 a year. So if that's the median when you describe affordable, then it's already pretty expensive housing. And what we find, even with some affordable housing, is that people are still spending 50% of their income on housing, which is not the formula that the feds give us. Which is about 30%. It's not what your mortgage broker would suggest is a good idea. I know there's realtors in the room. It's high because the income is so high. So that's what worries me about it. I applaud every effort that we make to create more affordable housing. I think there are some other not-for-profits in the city. Pine Street Inn, for example, has done amazing work to move individuals out of homelessness into permanent supported housing. People know Lindia Downey. She's done amazing work, and I know, Mary Jo, you've had some part in that. The Planning of Office for Urban Affairs, which is part of the Archdiocese of Boston, goes about the work of converting church property, unused church property, into housing. They just did a huge project on the edge of Chinatown with St. Francis House. They've done a big project on Columbia Road at the old St. Kevin's Parish. And they're doing projects across the rest of the Archdiocese, some responding to elder housing needs in those communities. And so it's wonderful work that happened. Lisa Alberghini, who runs the planning office, one of the best respected affordable housing builders, I think, in the state and in the city for sure. So there are not-for-profits in the space. The CNDCs are all doing affordable housing work, and I'm sure are all part of the plan. It's all tied to funding. We can only do it with the funding that becomes available. So that gets a little tricky. And with land costs so high, people might have seen what GE resold their property for, what Gillette just sold a parking lot for. It's just astronomically high. So then the cost of the housing that they put there has to be high so that they can make their margin.
Yeah. Well, and it has to be, the deals have to be structured in such a way, and I think that's what you were talking about, John, when you want market rate housing as well as middle income. One of the things that's tricky, though, in mixed income communities is how to make them communities. And let me just raise the issue of things that maybe people in this room can be thinking about doing. How do communities get built? How does social capital get built? What should the gang sitting around these tables be thinking about in terms of personal contributions to making it a better city? Peter called for volunteers, and volunteering is great, but there's something, there's something else, it seems to me, that has to go on. Any thoughts?
Well, there's an old model that talks about a poor door, that the housing that gets built for people who are living at the margins needs to be separate and segregated from other housing. And I think that's just something that your colleague who talks about zip code at Harvard has proven to be not true. That children who are being raised in poverty do much better if they're in communities where there's mixed income.
That's right.
Just much, much better. we see the governor today passing some zoning laws for suburban zoning changes that would allow for more affordable housing in the suburbs. So I think that those are the kinds of things that the government can do to help make sure that communities grow. And I think the use of not-for-profits in communities is very important also, that they have a role to play in helping to build social capital, helping to connect people, helping to, we have this great teen center in the Bowdoin Geneva neighborhood of Boston, and we have young people there who started in the program 16 years ago. It's an after-school program. Our commitment to their families is that if they stay in our program, they will find their way to college. We're pretty successful at that, and more than, I would say more than 90% of our kids over the 16 years have gone on to college, have graduated. We have a couple of our first students working for us running the program now. So we have great examples of people who have taken advantage of service, are great role models for the young people that are there today. And I think that history in the neighborhood helps create some of the capital.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think in building community, I think there are three factors that you need to build upon. One is trust.
Yeah.
The other one is connections to opportunity.
Yeah.
And the third one is efficacy, being able to join with others to solve problems. And in fact, connections, it's all about connections and relationships. So the work we did at the Dudley Street Neighbor Initiative and the work that people do around building strong neighborhoods starts with people being at tables like these, and which is why Peter talked about people being involved.
Yeah.
Get involved, meet people, and build trust, and create faith and hope in what we can do together by coming together. But also trust in institutions and government is a really important part of that community. Being able to trust institutions, and so residents working with nonprofit agencies in their communities. And some nonprofits do an amazing job of reaching out to residents and building that level of trust and engagement. Others, it feels like a closed wall, and you're there, but you're not a part of that community. And people should think about that. The second piece around opportunities, there are families that feel isolated in our city with all of these opportunities.
Yep. Yep.
You know, it took me going to Dartmouth to come back to Harvard for an understanding that there was a regatta here on the Charles River, and that we had a Charles River, right? Born and raised in Roxbury, I never experienced the Charles River. I went to Hanover, and I had some students there say, hey, we're going to the regatta. I said, what's that? And I came back to Boston. And so a lot of us live very isolated lives and don't fully understand the opportunities that we have around us. And so connecting to opportunities. And then lastly, efficacy, or having some kind of social agency where people can solve problems together. If I needed a loan, can I go to a neighbor? Do I have a family member that might be able to give me a microloan? And in fact, a lot of the city climate action plans are now being built on social efficacy and social resilience. So when you look at New York and what happened with Sandy, you know, having a berm or building a wall around the ocean to protect your city is one way to kind of think about, you know, how you deal with major storms. The other one is, in fact, the communities that did better after the storm was the community that had better, stronger communities in social capital, right? How do you help solve problems together in times of crisis? And that's the measure of a strong community. That's the measure of a strong city. So being able to be around the tables, have conversations, meet others, build trust, connect to opportunities, and solve problems together is how you build strong communities.
Another piece of that, though, isn't it, John, is building safe communities where people feel safe in their homes and safe in their neighborhoods. And there's been some huge changes in Boston over the last couple of decades in terms of how safe people feel in their neighborhoods. How can we make sure that that keeps going and that we kind of doesn't revert back to the really bad old days?
Right, no, absolutely. I think, so if you take trust, opportunity, and agency, you know, so can we relate to communities and people in Boston in a way that, and this is where the police conversation is important.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
It's interesting. Some people say, so when you hear Black Lives Matter, some people respond with Blue Lives Matter or Other Lives Matter, and it's really interesting because, of course, Blue Lives Matter is an obvious statement. Black Lives Matter is not, when you look at trends and numbers.
Yeah.
And so how do Black Lives Matter in terms of trends, data, and outputs in our society? In Boston, however, I think we've been able to really sort of operationalize and build trust around police and community in ways other communities have not.
That's right.
Right? Knock on wood, right? But we've done a
This
pretty
is
good
not
job.
wood, by the way.
That's not wood, I know, fine wood. But we've done a pretty good job. The other one is more people are working.
Yeah.
Even though
Good
we still
point.
have disparities within neighborhoods, they're historic lows.
Yeah.
5% in Roxbury is historic low.
Historic low.
Right? And so how do we continue to make sure, when I say opportunities for all Bostonians, we should all think stronger community, stronger Boston for everyone.
Yeah.
Right? And then lastly, we have to continue to solve problems together and create ways and tables for us to come together to make it that incrementally everybody feels like we are able to remove barriers from people's lives, because Boston might be doing well on a whole, there's still a whole lot of families who aren't doing so well. People who are being displaced out of our cities, people who have pressures around paying rent or having to move because the rent was just increased. I mean, the number of problems, how do we come to them and help solve that problem? And if we can do that, we continue to have a city that grows together and stays safe together.
Terrific. Peter, do you want to
Thank you very much.
move us to the next stage here?
We'll move to the next stage, but first let me thank all three of you. It was really a wonderful conversation. I was very taken by the idea that the economy in this country is good, but it's better for some than others, and I think we hit some of that. And this idea of the middle portion of society is really being somewhat left behind, but more in a moment. What we'd like to do is move now to the second phase, and we are going to have what I call an experiential speaker. I'm going to invite Christine to come up in just a moment. Christine is someone you'll hear from who really, like many of us, someone of goodwill, someone who tried to live her life as well as all of us with the best of intentions, and circumstances seem to derail that. And we're going to hear a story of someone who has moved in and out of poverty with some very difficult situations. So Christine, please come on up. And if I can get you to stand in the middle of the stage here. I'm sorry that I'm going to have Christine face out because I want people to be able to see her. So if you just come to the middle, and please just tell us what you'd like us to hear. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And a lot of my life has been experiences that they've already talked about. I grew up in a middle-class family. Father was a Boston firefighter. My mother was a director of nurses, and I grew up here in Boston. In 1992, I got married and everything was great. In 1993, in January, I found out that I was pregnant with my first child. And 2 weeks after I found out I was pregnant, I found out I was losing my job. And so we made it through that because I got unemployment. I had my child in October of 1992. And then I found another job. It was only part-time, and I did that for a while. And then as time went on, I had, in 1994, I was laid off again, lost that job, and then found another job that I worked part-time. And I worked 2 part-time jobs at that point. One at a hospital and one at a bank. And so things were okay. We both worked. And then as time went on, things got a little more difficult. I had my second child. Actually, I took in a child from Department of Social Services in May of 95, and in November 95, I had another child. So I had 3 children, all under the age of 6. My husband then lost his job, so we were left again. And at this point, I was in subsidized housing in Charlestown, barely making my rent, but we were okay. However, my son got very ill. The son that I had in '93 got very ill. And I was at a place at that point where I didn't make enough money to be able to pay for what he needed, and he was hospitalized for 10 days. And I made $11 too much to get any assistance at all. And so when I went to my pediatrician, she said, lose a job. And I said, if I lose a job, I'm really going to be sunk. And she said, lose a job. So what I did was I cut back hours just so I would fall within the guidelines that I needed. And then in 2006, I'm going to go forward again. And in 2006, I had to put my husband out because of substance abuse. And so I was left with 4 children. 3 of them had special needs. With really no real source of income, because I had been laid off from the bank. But prior to that, I had quit my job at the doctor's office that I had, so I could go full-time at the bank, so I could have health insurance. And so then I got laid off. I lived on my unemployment, and found a part-time job at my elementary school that my kids went to. I'm going to fast forward again. In 2010, the school closed, so I was again now left with no job. And by the grace of God, I ended up in housing court, which is the worst thing in the whole world that you have ever have to experience. And I was on the verge of losing we were going to be homeless. And so what happened was I had an aunt who lived in Cambridge, an elderly aunt, who needed somebody to be able to come in. And she wanted to die at home. In order for her to die at home, someone had to live with her. So I packed up my kids, and I moved in with her into Cambridge. And so in the meantime, I went to City Mission. They helped me and my kids. They got us through some really hard times. I went back to school. I got my master's, and so for 3 years, I used my loans for college in order to get my master's degree, to be able to keep a roof over my kids' head, food on the table, clothes on their backs. And at the end of that, I do have my master's in social work. I have my license. However, I still am in a place where I can't work full-time. I work for City Mission today. I do their data entry for their database for keeping track of people who donate. And so even today, and in a year from now, I'm going to end up in the same position I was in back in 2006, because I live in the house that my aunt owned. And once my youngest son, who is now 17, graduates from high school, that house has to be sold. And I do not make enough money to live in the city of Boston. I do not make enough money to live in the city of Cambridge. And so where are we going to end up a year from now? I don't know. And you talk about, the financial worries of kids. My kids have lived with that since they were very young, all the way up. And I was educated. I had my bachelor's degree when I got married. I got my master's degree, and we still are struggling to kind of make ends meet and to figure out where are we going to go, how are we going to go. I have a family now that lives with me who is homeless and now is in a shelter system and is being displaced out of Boston, because there's no way this mother of 4 young children is ever going to be able to afford the rents in Boston. She's on Social Security disability. And so I'm trying to find a place for her, us. I now have a brand new grandson who's now 3 months old, so I have him I have to worry about. Where do we go? Where do I take them? How do I meet the needs? I've grown up here. I don't want to have to leave. Am I going to? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know where that's going to end. And so that's kind of where we're at.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
That's quite a story. I mean, this is someone who had a college degree and life fell apart, and in the midst of it all, she has a master's in social work. Really quite a story. Still trying to find her own way and be able to stay above the poverty level. So thank you again, Christine. What I'd like to do now, the third part of the program, we're going to spend about 7 minutes at tables. There are suggested questions at the tables. The idea of this, just so that people know and our streaming audience might know, we have tried our best to mix the tables somewhat, and what we're hoping to do is that we have people of different backgrounds at tables, and maybe perhaps people could share some of their experience, whether they have experienced some of the things we've talked about tonight, or that they know people who have, and be able to just cross ideological lines, religious lines, language lines, and we'll get back after that to asking questions to our panel for about a half hour, and we'll end at 8 o'clock. So please talk at tables for about 6 or 7 minutes, and then we'll cut it and come back to, we'll try to stump our panel. Thank you.
You gotta try to stump us, that's good.
Yeah, good.
Okay, in the interest of time, maybe I can get you back. And we'll have about 25 minutes of questions, and we have people interspersed through the room. Can you just raise your hand if you have a microphone? We have one here. Paul, you're going to be over here. So we have one over here and one over here. Okay, the streaming audience, I just want to remind, if you do want to ask a question, you can enter it into your chat box, and we will announce it here. So if you have a question, just please come up to one of the microphones and see if we can begin to get this going. Do we have one? Is there a question here? Go ahead.
Okay. I go to St. Cecilia's Parish, and we have a parishioner that has been talking to me because he's 76 years old. He's lived in an apartment over near Symphony Hall for 40 years. And he just got a letter from the lawyer of the person who owns the building, and he's being evicted. Yeah. And again, he's elderly, he's all alone. He comes to St. Cecilia's on Sunday. We give him food. So he has very minimal amount of money and all of that. So I, from a friend, suggested he take the letter and go to Boston Housing Authority, and he called me today because he went there and they told him there's nothing that anybody can do, that he needs to get a lawyer. He has no money for a lawyer, and he's not in subsidized housing. So I didn't know if you had some advice that I might be able to give him for where he might go for somebody who's 76 years old, on his own, with a limited income, and he's going to be homeless. And everybody says to me, oh, they can't throw him out in the street. He's an elderly guy, and so on and so forth. But that's not the impression he got from Boston Housing Authority. They told him there's nothing we can do for you. And I saw the eviction letter. He showed it to me. There's not a reason. They just didn't raise his rent. His rent is $1,400 a month for a one-bedroom. So they obviously want, and now it's all students over there. And so, they just want him out of there so that they can redo the apartment and make a lot more money. So I just wonder if you had some advice that I might be able to pass on to him about what he might do. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, so first of all, I think he does have some rights. And there are there's legal assistance out there. There's a group out of Harvard, the Harvard, come on, what's the housing legal folks at Harvard? They do it for free. And in blanking right now for the name, they do a good job. And he needs to get a lawyer, but there are free lawyers out there, and I'm gonna remember it before I leave today. Boston Legal Services, thank you very much. Blanking on it, thank you very much. Boston, Greater Boston Legal Services, they do a good job. They do a good job, you should contact them. The second part of my answer is this. We just submitted a bill to the State House. Your friend is not alone.
Yeah.
This is a problem across the city in a major way. We need people to advocate that the bill passes and becomes law that protects anyone over 65 years old and provides rent control. This is something we need to address because it's a vulnerable population in our city and they're getting kicked out everywhere. Greater Boston Legal Services is great, but nobody should have to deal with this. And if you've been in your apartment for that long, you should have some protections, and we've got to get that law passed.
I'd say elders are the probably single fastest growing group of people in poverty in the country, probably in our city. So we're seeing more elders at all of our programs.
May I give a suggestion? This is a protective service issue, and you should file a protective service report. Central Boston Elder Service is the agency dealing with elder protective service issues. There is a hotline, a 1-800 number, or you can call Central Boston Elder Services.
Okay. I could probably speak loud enough to everybody here without anyway. I actually find this actually a very interesting one, especially after the lived experience one. You've started out, and we frequently will talk about childhood education and child care, but as you say, the fastest growing group. Actually, if anybody take a look around the room and guess the average age, and I'll give you a hint. Up until Sunday, my hair had a lot more gray in it. So, we are really talking about that, and when we start talking about unemployment, youth unemployment has dropped between 1/3 and 1/2. However, if we look at employment over the age of 50, it has not budged. In fact, a report came out in March that of the 40 million people we have stably employed at the age of 50, 22 million will lose at least one job, and of those, only 2 million will ever recover. We have women that have taken time out of the workforce, have worked part-time, and women live longer. They will live in poverty for a longer time. It takes, if you look at the stickiness of poverty, it takes 5 generations to go from deep poverty to median income. So what are we doing about that? And when you start talking about isolation, this gentleman is isolated within his community. So how can we address these issues if we are not looking at, the Fed came out with something that says workplace discrimination starts at 40. So how can we address these issues of inequality when all we're talking about sometimes we think is people with young children? When, let's put it this way, kids are attached to parents. Parents and kids are attached to grandparents. And how do we deal with that and put those people and all the gray hair and gray matter back into the community?
I'm obviously the oldest one on this panel, and so I'm going to start off on that. I mean, and I get to say this because I'm an old lady. When you actually look at the poverty rates in this country, and I suspect it's true in the city as well, the elderly actually have lower poverty rates than any other age group. And Social Security has done a remarkable job in helping the elderly come out of poverty. And so I think when many of us talk about the issues of children, we look at those spending disparities and we say, you know, we've got to worry about the next generation. Having said that, as the old lady in the room, you know, you're clearly right. And I think the social isolation issue is probably as big an issue for older people as are the more material issues. And you know, as we've been talking about developing housing and developing neighborhoods, I think that the extent to which housing can not only be mixed income but also mixed generation can be a really important thing, and that when services are located for people, you know, obviously elder services and all that sort of thing, but to the extent that they can help build communities, it can be really an important thing. You know, the other piece of what you're saying, though, is you know, if you're 55, you're not really old. You've got a long time to live. You shouldn't be collecting your Social Security yet because, and so I think that enforcing the age discrimination laws is actually a really important thing there, and helping employers. You know, one of the things that's kind of interesting is, you could probably speak to this better, John, but I have the floor, so I'm going to talk. You know, you hear employers say, can't hire people, can't find anybody that can do the jobs, you know. Well, you know, why don't you look? Why don't you look at older people? Why don't you look at people who might have a CORI problem? Why don't you look at people whose English is maybe not so good? Got to educate people in that regard. Anyway.
No, yeah, I think you're on. This is very important. I'm going to join you with some of the issues here, right? So, and then I probably should try to say something positive. But when you look at housing for elders, the subsidy has been drained. Yeah. There really aren't a lot of sources out there. And in fact, sitting with the city's chief of housing recently, she is trying to find, and this is for any CDCs out there, developers out there, she's trying to find the next project for affordable elderly living, and it's hard to find. The 202's dried up. I mean, there's just a problem in that space. When you begin to think about what employers are looking for, everyone talks about millennials.
Yeah.
Right? And in fact, what I said earlier is true. It's not just about the new individuals coming into the workplace. It is about economic mobility and taking the people who are in the workspace and retraining. And you have to be disposed to, you have to be able to find retraining to be relevant in today's economy, no matter what age, right? You got to learn the new thing and be out there. And we've got to have more opportunities for our elders to be retrained. And I get it. People aren't trying to, learn coding at a certain age. But there are basic retrainings that really make you employable. And that is it is something we need to do and do more effectively with our elders.
And that's part of the opportunity of having such a good economy and such low unemployment rates that employers really do have to. Sorry.
The Boston College has a Center for Aging that was doing some research on this work and talking about the next 20 years, the 20 years that happen between 60 and 80, when people want to be able to work part-time, maybe not full-time, take advantage of some of the skills that they've developed. And so for the responsibility of the employers to take a look at the jobs that they have and try and match them to some of the great skills that are out there for people that have spent their life working and are not quite ready to be finished, but don't want to do, 60-hour work weeks anymore. So there's some interesting research out there to be looked at about some of the solutions. I can't pretend to be an expert at it, but.
Can I add just one more thing?
Sure.
We also have the women who, like this woman over here, who has at periods of time stepped out of the workforce or done part-time. So you actually have this concept of, in politics, the deification of the stay-at-home parent, but in policies, they're demonized. So and when you're actually even looking at Social Security, it's designed for a married couple and all of that, and you have no credits for caregiving, so your high 35 might actually have zeros in it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there were those issues too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I have a question.
Thank you. From what you were sharing, it sounds like to me that housing is sort of the central issue to stabilize any family or any situation. And so, I was really intrigued by this idea of a third for low income, third for middle, and then third for market. There are two questions I have. Is that something that's happening in certain areas of the city to sort of slow the gentrification? Is that sort of the response? And is there a reverse of that, so that there are places that are like in different zip codes, let's say, that are where that type of housing is being created as well? That's one of my questions. The other is, what did it take to put that together? Because I think what I'm thinking, I live just south of Boston, and we're sensing, we hear the movement from Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan out to Randolph, Holbrook, and those communities. And so it's going to be coming to those communities at some point as well. So what would it take to expand that model into sort of the periphery, the suburban periphery areas where people are now living that commuting to Boston for work?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you raised that because we haven't really talked about regional issues, and I think that's very important. But John, you're the housing guy.
No, I think first and foremost, in fact, you echoed what we said up here.
Yeah.
Housing is at the heart of a lot of what we're talking about. Let me say this: a third is not that simple. So you heard, there are large ranges, right? And I remember the first time in my neighborhood when POA came and said, hey, look, we want to do housing for women who are transitioning out of homelessness. And all the neighbors, they said, no, absolutely not, right? We don't want homeless, it's like really? Right? And that's in Dorchester, and I fought hard to say, yeah, no, we do. Right, in Upham's Corner, and we want, and we've got to do from homelessness, in that bottom third, all the way up to, 60% AMI, right? And then in that middle third, we're moving from 60, 80, 100, 120% AMI. It's a long range, right? And in order to cover the kind of mixes we're talking about, we got to go deep, and then we got to go wide. And we have to fight the NIMBYism in our neighborhoods throughout the city. There is not an equal share of affordable housing in all neighborhoods. Shocker. Shocker, right? And some neighborhoods fight the city hard when we try to support affordability in your neighborhood. So you here who might live in neighborhoods who don't have a lot of affordable housing, help us, right? In other cities, housing is a regional issue. Boston, in fact, is part of a regional economy. And we, like DC probably a little bit more than Boston, we're probably one of the most inflated cities during the day in the United States. DC surpasses us. Nobody lives in DC, but everybody goes to work in DC. Same thing in Boston, right? So we have we probably double in size during the day. Everybody comes up from the region to work here, and then they go, out. And in fact, when you look at the numbers, the people of Boston of lower means leave the city to work in lower paying jobs. Yeah. People of higher means outside the city come to the city to take higher paying jobs. It's a really bad equation. However, the other cities don't want to help with housing production. It's a regional economy. And the Metropolitan Planning Agency has, they kind of put out there that we need about 130,000 new units of housing to be built in our region. Maybe we can get some of that built. And I think we need to urge our towns and cities to build a certain way so that we can house the population. It's a regional conversation.
Yeah,
and I don't want to get myself in political hot mess by saying
Okay. But it really is, and if people are looking for things, where you can really have an impact, being part of the conversation, you live in the suburbs especially, don't be afraid of dense housing developments, especially along public transportation corridors. I'm on the board of an affordable housing developer, and who kind of tries to put together these financial deals where you can have mixed income housing, and they're very exciting. And but it's got to be dense, it's got to be mixed. It takes a lot to make it happen, and when the neighborhood is actively opposed, that makes it really hard. So that's something everybody can do. Peter is looking at us.
I think we have time for one more question. In the back of the room, we haven't had one back here. You have one?
A few observations. One, the housing court does have judges who do have the wherewithal to suspend the execution for 6 months.
Yep.
And that's for folks who are elderly or disabled. So the judge would have the opportunity to make a determination as to whether they should be evicted and then to decide whether or not to suspend the issuance of an execution, just so that you know. One of the things that I'm observing is that there's a lot of concepts that we're discussing here, but I'm wondering about some of the initiatives that we as a community can participate in. So I'm an independent employer. I work for myself. And I myself have actually tried to tap into some of the resources that I can't necessarily even identify, which are, for instance, to find people who are unemployed that might be part of an unemployment system, maybe the unemployment office where you go, the Department of Unemployment Assistance, and where they would have a resource, or there would be a city resource where I could contact them and say, hey, you've got some folks who are 40 years and older, or people that have been in the workforce that have more experience than the young kids that are getting jobs nowadays. Where do I find these people? What are the resources available for people like me? Or, for instance, we're talking about the idea of financial, I think the illiteracy was the term that was used. What can we as individuals do to help those people that have no idea about how to balance a checkbook? I remember having a roommate who sat down with me and he showed me his financial circumstances, and I'm like, this is simple. I mean, can't you see? And no, these people don't know. There's a lot of people out there that just don't know. But it's easy for us to help them. So where do we go for this? We're talking about concepts, but I'm trying to figure out how we can actually, as individuals that are here tonight, participate and actually, make it easy for us, because we're all busy. Some of us are smarter, and therefore we're, maybe working longer and harder, but we're also wanting to, use that time to do something.
I suspect Debbie will have some ideas
I
for
think
you.
there's a few things that you can do. One is certainly on the financial literacy one specifically. United Way has taken the lead on doing a lot of that work. They do some center in partnership with the city, and they do it in other cities out in the gateway cities, we call them, the former industrial manufacturing cities in Massachusetts. And they have a great website, and they have a great volunteer page. So those opportunities to try and find out where those things are happening are kind of all centralized there in their on their website. So it's unitedwaymassbay.org, I think. The other thing I would suggest is some of the career centers. So JVS, Jewish Vocational Services, which is on Summer Street, is probably one of the leading not-for-profits doing job training in the city, if not in the state. We always say at our Catholic Charities, when we grow up, we want to be Jewish Vocational Services, because they just do a stellar job doing the work. So look them up. They're training people all the time. They're training for hospitals. They have a contract to train their staff for CVS. They're doing all sorts of work. We do work too, but those are two places where I would go, because I think that's where you'll get a maximum benefit from information. I think the most information be available at places like that.
Yeah. Well, and there are other nonprofits.
Yep.
I mean, I know you guys do workforce training. Project Hope in Dudley, which I know, John, you know about, and
Pine Street Inn does some.
Pine Street does, and always, open to volunteers, and especially, I think, when you're looking for people to hire, those organizations would really like to help you out.
Yeah, I'd even look at community colleges.
The follow-up question is, so we know that because we've just asked the question, we're all here. Is there a resource that, for instance, the government can provide the citizens so that there is an aggregation of this information, or does it exist, and do people know about it, and how can it be promoted? Because a lot of us want to help, but I don't think any of us necessarily know where to go or where to start. Like, I just had to ask this question and get an answer. Hopefully I'll remember it, but nobody else is necessarily going to be here to know that, and all the people out there that, what can the government do to give us that resource center for all those things?
Okay, let's just take this at the last one. Please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So the career centers, the financial empowerment centers that we host, I would go to our website, and you would find, I'd go to the Office of Workforce Development, and in fact, you would find ways you can volunteer. So tax preparation, tax income credit is a huge benefit to our poor families. And in fact, one of the initiatives that we have been able to measure for most impact is people being able to get their tax credits. The other one would be, in fact, we have a list of JVS, but all the other workforce development agencies in Boston that we end up funding. So the Office of Workforce Development, City of Boston website, go check it out.
And there's a state Office for Workforce Development, Department of Labor also, that does the same.
Okay, A couple of things. First, let us thank this panel for a wonderful, wonderful meeting. Thank you very much. And let us not forget Christine, too. Really a beautiful discussion and presentation. Thank you, Christine. Okay, in the interest of time, we try to end this at 8 o'clock, and we're just about there. A couple of things I want to wrap up with is, if you have any questions, if some of the panel members will stay a few moments, please feel free to come up. If they can stay, I'm sure they'll try to. Other than that, I want to ask you again, as we end this cycle this year, we'll have the summer off with no meetings. We'll be planning our new schedule over the summer months, and for those who are interested, you can get to our webpage. If you're on our mailing list, we'll keep you appraised of talks that will be coming up as we start the next academic year in September. Another reminder is just, these meetings do cost us a lot of money. They are free to you, and we are happy that you're here. The intent here is to raise consciousness so that as a city, we can be more informed, and as people, we can potentially act to do something to help people in greater need than ourselves in most cases. On your tables, there are envelopes. If you'd consider taking one, making an offering either in cash or by check. If you want to fill out your credit card information on the envelopes, you can do that. If you want to swipe a credit card at the back of the room here, Emily with her hand raised would be happy to take that for you. We would be very, very appreciative. I also want to remind our streaming audience that they can donate online. If they go to our webpage, at the upper right corner, there is a green button. It'll take you right into many different options to donate. So we appreciate that. A final reminder is, as you leave tonight, please consider stopping at our 2 action tables. One are being our own, A Faith That Does Justice. We're looking for volunteers for our ESOL program. It's a great opportunity for really intercultural interaction. The people who are learning are recently arrived people. They have stories to tell. And most of us here who speak English really can benefit from the stories of these people while offering the skills that you bring to the table for them. We also have Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. They're at the back of the room as well, so please do consider stopping by. With that, I want to wish everybody a happy, happy summer. We hope to see you next fall as we begin a new cycle of talks, both our workshops and community meetings and our ESOL program. So thank you very much for being here, and enjoy your summer.